And next up, we are going to be going into what the topic I've been looking forward to most. And it's not because my business partner is hosting it and I can heckle from the sidelines, but it's actually because I have so many of these myself that I've experienced. We're talking about Liveops disaster stories. So Ella, head on up and I'll if I can get the panel to come up and join you, and I think you'll be introducing people. Hopefully that mic there should work. Testing. Is that mic working, or do I need to have this?
I'll just take yours, Oscar, then you can't heckle me. Right. So I'm Ella. I'm Oscar's business partner for my sins. I'm also the CEO of Fundamentally Games. As if you've been around today, you've probably heard we're a living games publisher. So we basically do all the things that publishers do, plus run Liveops for games, hence why I'm here. This panel idea actually came from a digital panel that we did at Pocket Gamer a few months ago. And the request from the panelists was that they wanted to be able to tell the disaster stories. So we are going to do a typical panel. I'm going to ask some questions, but actually what I've asked is for each of the panelists to have prepared a couple of disaster stories. The goal being probably a few laughs, but also hopefully some learnings that you can all take away and either try and avoid the mistakes yourselves, or maybe at least, be aware of them. So before we go into that, would like everyone to introduce themselves, particularly related to your role with Liveops. So let's start this end.
Sorry, I'm Mario. I'm an executive producer at Jagex, developing a new MMORPG. I've been developing MMORPGs for 20 years. I started with EverQuest in 2001, 2002, and I've been now worked on 10 to 15 different MMOs, both as a developer and a publisher.
So hi, I'm Sarah. You've definitely outdone my experience. Great. So I started in gaming around 2006, also in MMOs, actually doing very early Liveops, which I'll talk about a bit, hopefully, in a moment. Yeah, it's mostly in PC free-to-play and subscription games. So I specialize in sort of like taking free-to-play games from subs to free-to-play. As a business model, but more interestingly, I've developed an interest in social gaming, and I've been actually working in social game spaces or playing in social game spaces since 1991, back on Mushes and Muds.
Hello? Yes. So I lost my voice, so I'm sorry. So I really got to whisper into the mic. But I'm Philippe, Erwin, background from Activision, Blizzard, Warner Games, etc. Most recently with Robot Cash. So my Liveops experience has to do with being an online retail store on the blockchain. And we've got a few of those. So slightly different angle.
Great. Sounds good. So before we dive in, one question, because everybody asked this, it's a different thing. What does Liveops mean to you? Go on. Yep.
All right. Okay. For me, live operations is any product that I'm operating as a continuous service where I keep the development team and a separate team supporting and updating and operating a game past the point of retail release to customers. So for me, Liveops is all the effort that goes around maintaining a service.
So on top of that, a little bit, mine's also, it's very player-centric. It's about keeping players engaged in the game and retaining players and lengthening the time of that those players want to spend with you playing your game.
Yeah, so pretty much ditto all of the above, plus anything that happens after the launch of a game or a product or a platform in the games. Back in the old days, you'd launch something and you just pray and walk away and go on your next project. That's all changed, whether it's free to play, whether it's MMOs, whether it's platform selling games. So it's all of that, keeping it going. I remember we used to have a break when we launched a game. Remember back, and now it's like 24/7.
Brilliant. Okay, right, so we're going to go into the disasters. So I've asked, as I said, each of the panelists to prepare a few disaster stories, talking about the context of it, why it happened, hopefully what they learned from it to avoid it again, which we'll see if that's true. Who wants to go first? Go on. Shall I take off this? Okay, so
I don't know if you guys can hear me. Sorry, you guys missed my introduction as well.
Sorry.
Sorry.
No, right.
I'm
so sorry.
No worries.
No worries.
Oh.
Sorry, do you want to introduce yourself before we carry on?
Sure. Yeah, hello, my name is Arjun and I work as a producer. You guys have already trumped me with your experience. I've only been in the industry for around 5+ years now. And I worked for studios like Zynga, a gaming startup called Moonfrog Labs. And right now I'm working for SEGA Hardlight. And I've mainly worked on live operations so far. Basically, all these companies have these titles which are forever franchises that have been running for a really long time for their loyal fan base, and I've been working on those. And another point, just to add on what Liveops means to me, I think what we do in live operations is give players a reason to continuously keep falling in love with the game that they are already playing. And I think that's a very powerful factor for me. We give players new reasons to fall in love with the game that they've been playing for a while.
Great. All right, go for it, Sarah.
I was going to say that's much more beautifully put than I said it.
I might steal some of that.
Yeah, I'm going to steal that one as well. So to contradict something that Oscar said earlier, actually, I totally agree with no knee-jerk reactions, but there is a point where sometimes you need to look at things very fast. So the example I've got, which still keeps me awake at night, is a land rush launch, be it a launch of a new game, be it a relaunch, or be it a major feature launch, and being able to get those players into the game. Because you'd be surprised, sometimes you can't. So I've worked on, so first sort of free-to-play conversion I did, we had to spin up extra hardware on the fly. We had players queuing. And, I walked away without going, oh my God, I'm never going to do this ever again. And several years later, find myself only being able to get 10% of my players into game, which is something you really don't want to do. So it could be anything from making sure you've got the open connections in the game on the tech, anything that is a barrier for getting those players into the game. You really want that not to be there when you're doing a major sort of event, when you've put a lot of marketing money in, or you've done a lot of promotion. Any barriers that might exist, test it, stress test it, work through it, because that is the point. Those players will come into the game, only the hardcore will keep trying. The rest will leave and they won't come back. And yeah, that has caused disasters for me before. So that's a sad story, sorry.
It's okay.
Who wants to go next?
I'll go next. So I think one of the big points you brought up, which is interesting, which is one of the main keys about being a disaster is how badly it affects the players, right? Because you could have disasters that go unnoticed, but cost you a lot of money. And then players cost you money and players. So again, mine is going to be coming from the platform perspective. So what's unique in our platform is we allow players to resell their games. So think of it Steam on the blockchain. So you have a game, you resell it. The problem is the way it works is you basically have your game in your stash and you press a button that says, I'm ready to resell. It's not automatic. It's if there's somebody who's willing to buy it. So you get into a queue. So of course, the first thing that came up during our user testing is, wait a second, you've got sales all the time. I don't want to resell at $3. I bought it for 49 euros. I want to make sure. And so we created this feature where you can press a button that says, okay, do not sell my game during a sales event. Of course, what didn't work? So we launched our platform and we've got, tens of thousands of users. And everybody's trying out the sales thing because it's cool. I get to get rid of my games. I get to get store credit to buy new games. And what happens is all their games get sold during the sale event. And so the problem is then we're in a position where they're coming to us saying, hey, I want because they get 25% cut of whatever it should have been. It should have been 30 euros. Instead, it was 5 euros. So you do the math. 25% of 30 versus 5, big difference. So our initial reaction was, well, sorry, we messed up. It's a feature, so you're going to get only that because we still, we're paying the publisher a certain amount of money, and they bought it for that price. So everything together, that's how it works. And of course, the player, the consumer, is king and queen. So we had to eat it, and we had to get them the exchange. So that was one of those disasters that initially was I was seeing it ramp up. I'm like, all right, this is going to be a PR disaster. Let's nip it in the bud. But that's the thing. So what is the lesson learned? When you're doing something new and innovative, over-test it, and there you go.
Okay, who wants to go next?
Yeah, I can go. Right. So being a producer, one of the main battles always for me is prioritization. And working in Liveops, there's always a constant battle of what takes higher priority, like stuff that needs to be tackled 2 months down the line, stuff that's going to become like a really massive problem for us 2 months down the line versus what's an actual issue right now. And when you're working for smaller teams, this battle becomes even worse because you have only limited number of people to tackle these problems. This was an incident that happened when I was working for my gaming startup in India, and we were working on casino games that would target the subcontinent market. And cricket is really massive over there, and we had this really big cricket tournament coming up in a couple of months. And these kind of sporting events, when they're live, your KPIs hurt really bad because players lose focus, they shift to them. And we wanted a feature to tackle that. We kept deprioritizing it for a really long time because there was always like a lower fruit that we could tackle and always kept getting pushed down the line. Suddenly we find out it's only a week away. Everyone's alarm bells are ringing really loud. We need to tackle this problem right now. The event is supposed to start on Monday. We are sitting on Wednesday right now. 2 days of actual weekdays left to tackle this. We come up with a spec. Team thinks of like taking this challenge up, and we design a very basic feature that would let players log into the game and bet some currency on the ongoing sporting event. It was basically a simple feature that would remind them of our existence, so that they don't forget about us once the tournament's over. We start working on it. Thursday morning, come to the office. Sunday evening is when we finally leave the office after doing the release. Everyone's just messed up after like endless cycles of development. Me as a producer, I'm doing localizations on this feature. So we release the game. It's gone live. The match starts on Monday evening, and we are like keenly looking at the metrics of the feature. And surprise, surprise, there's barely anyone interacting with the feature. And that's when it hit us. Like the key part of this feature was push notifications that would actually remind players that they need to come back to this feature. And we never hooked up push notifications for them. And again, alarm bells, team gets triggered. We all come back to the office, work another couple of days, integrate push notifications. Feature finally goes live again. And this time, thankfully, no mess ups were made. But we like built a decent feature that served its purpose. And that's when my studio took notice of this thing called planning and having a decent roadmap for the year, which has these key events marked so that you don't forget about them and you start planning way in advance. So yeah, fun times.
Okay, yeah, right. And yours?
I'll do it quick that way. Save a little time. When I was first a producer, so I started as a game designer, and my first job as a producer, like, Mario, we're promoting you. You're going to move, and we want you to work on Star Wars. You know, so you're going to move to Texas, work on Star Wars Galaxies. That's our other MMO besides EverQuest that needs a lot of attention. And you're going to be in charge of a new kind of a new project we're doing with LucasArts. It's called the New Game Enhancements. And I was like, oh, okay, that sounds cool. Like, that sounds like fun. What's that going to be like? So to keep this quick, because this is usually like, I need a beer and like, you know, a couple of hours to discuss this. But I was young, I was in my 20s, I was the youngest producer there. I was quite scared. I was in a lot of meetings with Lucas executives and Sony executives talking about the future of the game. And essentially what they had decided was, at the time, Star Wars Galaxies, which was the first MMO that had been done in the Star Wars universe, only had about 300,000 paying users, right? So for Lucas, that was a failure. That was not acceptable. It wasn't, I think, you know, the marketing person I spoke to about it said, Mario, I can, you know, defecate in a box, put it on the shelf, write Star Wars on it, and it will sell 2 to 3 million units. So you only have 300,000. That is, that's a problem for us. The lead designer of Star Wars Galaxies, on his own, unsanctioned, just kind of for fun, was working on a combat prototype, which was a Twitch combat prototype. So if any of you know the game, it was turn-based, sandbox game, So it didn't have any of the features of games like World of Warcraft or whatever. Our lead designer was Rev Koster, so he was the one who was really directing this kind of open world sandbox feeling of the game. And what happened, just bad coincidence, was our other lead designer who took over after Raf got promoted, Dan, was doing this kind of little experiment in his office, and the producer from Lucas just happened to walk by. He got a demo. They saw the game, using Twitch Combat. And so the commandment then came down from the vice president of LucasArts, which is, you have 9 months. We've already bought TV commercial time. We need the game completely converted to this style of combat. And we want the whole game. So this is not, originally it was a new tutorial. And what they told us was, we asked you guys to develop Star Wars. We wanted Han Solo and Luke Skywalker. You gave us Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru. And that's not what we want for the future of the franchise. So that started a 9-month death march, essentially. So 7 days a week in the office, dinners every night there, of course, all paid by Sony and stuff. And in the end, we released something that I had to give my first ever interview to the New York Times about how my first trip ever to New York, I was like 26, to explain why I had destroyed this beloved MMO that people had put hundreds of hours into and what was our thinking. And of course, back then, this is 12, 13 years ago, I couldn't say, Lucas wanted, I can't blame. We had, definitely there were people internal to Sony that, agreed with him, right? It wasn't just one person saying, hey, you're gonna do it this way, but for them, they knew, I think, at that point, they were going to make a new Star Wars MMO. They had already negotiated and signed the contracts, and so the idea was make this one work or kill it, right? And so that's where we learned, basically, they ran it like a retail product. So they bought TV time and everything that sets a hard date. That means there's no room to test, there's no room for QA, there's no room for anything. You just have to put it out there and hope it works. And that was my first disaster experience with an MMORPG.
Wow. Okay. Anyone got one that can beat that? Well, let's go. Have we got more?
He does.
Oh, okay. I've got your microphone, so you can't. Sorry.
How about Sony having a crash where everyone basically takes down the whole PSN network and they have to bring down your game completely for months, and then you find a way to bring it back? How about that?
That's bad. That's like, that's like.
Does that beat yours?
That's forever bad. Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Okay.
The only other one that I had that was similar was FIFA. Oh, sorry. So my first job at EA, I'm never worked in publishing, only worked as a developer. So I knew nothing. And they're like, you're there with all the publishing people. They're quite ruthless, right? They're like, hey, if this game doesn't sell this much, we're killing that studio. Or, they run it like an American business, basically, which is one thing I sort of respected about EA was they were very honest. They would tell people, okay, here's 50 million, go make FIFA or whatever. You have to sell this much. It has to come out on this date. And it's all your responsibility. Whereas when I worked at more like Sony or Ubisoft, it was more like they managed the budgets. They would kind of, hey, here's, $1 million a month or whatever to make your game, and we'll tell you when it's done. So it felt like you were more in control at a place like EA. So at EA, I was there in 2008, and in 2010 was the World Cup. So they had done a deal with FIFA to release on the page of FIFA.com, the homepage of FIFA.com, which gets 1 billion hits a day during the World Cup, a free-to-play version of FIFA that they were co-developing with a company in South Korea called NeoWiz, but it had to be ready to go day and date with the World Cup, which is in 2010. I think that was South Korean World Cup. And so I was in my first meeting. I was in my 20s. I'm in this meeting with the head of FIFA, the vice president of this and that. EA has so many VPs, and I was a director, and they were like, so Mario, you're really cool. You helped us with development. We appreciate that. You're not like just a mean publishing guy. So we're going to tell you something. We're probably not going to make it in time for the World Cup because we're a bit behind on the schedule. But, keep that between us, right? Like kind of thing. And in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, my boss is the head of all online in Europe and North America. And I'm like, do I tell my boss? Do I rat them out? Do I keep it inside? So then I was scared. So I told my boss, I really trusted him. He told, and Ben, it went to the COO, it went to the CEO of EA at the time was John Riccatello. And then, basically the FIFA team, even to this day. So the head of the FIFA team at that time was a guy named Andrew Wilson, who is now the CEO of EA. So I think maybe even to this day, I'm sure he'd laugh about it now. But back then, he was like, yeah, you're never coming to another meeting again. We're never talking to you about FIFA. And they had to reduce the scope of the game to make it in time for the World Cup. So they only released, they're supposed to do multiple countries. And I think they only did the US or a couple of countries to make it.
They did get it out on the date.
I believe so. I was left out of the loop a little bit after that.
Well, let's see. Can anyone beat that one as well?
I can't beat either one of those, but I got a funny story, brings back memories. We were at Warner Brothers, just new back in the games, and we were doing Matrix. Now we had a client, we had a partner for Matrix, the console and the PC game, but we decided to do Matrix MMO internally with the studio that we bought. And that was, the studio had never done a multiplayer MMO type game, and certainly hadn't done it with a movie date, because at the time, the movie dates were sacred. If you missed a movie date, you weren't launching. Now, fortunately, they're splitting them up. So, I can't tell you, we're like a month out from movie launch, and I'm spending a lot more time on the console and the PC. We're working with Atari, was a partner at the time. And so we come in and we start looking at the demo for the game, and I go, this is single player. I'm like, yeah, but just imagine, now all we got to do, we got a great map, and it was literally like 3 textures and 2 colors. I go, guys, you could be working 24 hours a day, go back in time, this thing's not shipping. So all the executives who knew nothing about games outside of the games group, right, were all coming in and goes, when is it coming? Is it a week before? Are we doing like a review? Because we got this whole we're doing this whole review of the film 2 weeks before this premiere. I'd like to play the game at the premiere. And so it was my job to tell them the really, really bad news, which there is nothing coming out except the console game. This MMO world with a team that's never done it ain't happening. And the only thing that bailed us out, we had to get Sony to come in because they're experts, and we had to give them DC Online. So the whole story ended up that we've eventually launched it, but the only reason why they even took it over, because we realized that even after the film, we didn't have the wherewithal to do it. Sony obviously knew this stuff, and they said, well, there is something we like in your portfolio, so we'll take the DC Online, and that's how that story evolved. So bad for my career, but funny story.
And Arjun, what about you? Any other good stories?
Yeah, but not as such massive scale stories. This is more of like day-to-day game development. So this was back when I was working on Farmville to Web, when it used to be pretty massive. And we have this concept in live operations called the on-call team. And everyone generally hates being on the on-call team. On-call team is this rotational team which has a POC from every department. And that team has to be available 24/7 because it's a live title and issues can come up at any given point. So we were like, this is around midnight. And we started getting a couple of reports from our CS agents that players are not able to load their game in a particular geo. And generally, like, game not loading is like the reddest alert that you can ever get. Players are blocked. So we were all young, super eager, and we came online. We were like, today we will solve this issue. Without looking properly into it, we were like, oh, okay, so this particular language is not loading for players. Our QA came online, did a quick test, and obviously it wasn't working. So we fixed a hacky fix, and within like 15-20 minutes of us getting the issue, we fixed it, released it. Back in the day of web, it was super easy to send out a release, and we were done. Within like half an hour of first report, we were already done fixing the issue. And we gave each other virtual high fives, and we were like, yeah, good job. See you guys tomorrow in the office. We were about to log off, and suddenly our inboxes exploded with reports of no one's able to load their game anymore, regardless of whatever language they're playing the game in. What had happened was we managed to fix that one language, but with the hacky fix that we sent in, we ruined everything else. And now with so many reports coming in, more people started coming online. We reverted the fix that we did, pushed out a proper fix, which thankfully fixed all languages. You could play the game regardless of whatever geo you were in. Problem solved. Next morning, everyone's back in the office. And that's when we asked the question that we should have asked last night. What was the actual impact of the initial issue? And it turns out there were a grand total, and I remember this number till date, there were a grand total of 11 players using that language. And the reports that we were getting was from this one player who was not able to load his game, and he had multiple accounts. So he started spamming and reporting issue from his multiple accounts. And yeah.
Okay, that's a good one, I think. Yeah. Okay, Sarah, how about you?
Actually, it reminds me of a story in a similar sort of vein, but we, many years ago, so when I started at Codemasters Online, which sadly is no longer with us, we were working on a game, and we got some reports in from sort of like customer support players, I can't remember which, basically talking about, there's an exploit in the game, which always makes you like, exploit in the game. And it turned out players were intercepting traffic between the client and the server and pushing money into the game and effectively breaking the economy. So much as yours, like we were in the hours, the messages came in. I remember the messages coming in about 11 o'clock at night till 3 in the morning. We were there banning players, stopping accounts until we could sort of rein control back over the economy. But we did, and we survived. But yeah, that was a long night. That was a long night.
Has anyone got any questions? Oh, there's some one back there. Yeah, just speak loudly.
Oh, hello. Thank you for this chat. This is really awesome. If you don't laugh, you'll cry, right? I just had a little fun question. What's your opinion on the current kind of epic failure of the Battlefield 2042 launch that's happening since November, launched with a bunch of bugs and stuff, and it seems like they're losing their audience. So I just wondered if you guys had any opinion on that.
You looked a bit like you might have an opinion.
I just think it's sad because, Call of Duty had an off year then as well, where they kind of recycled basically older stuff. It helped Halo, which I guess was good because Halo hadn't come out in quite a while. I think, honestly, it's a shame. You can see it's an in-between game between, the next Battlefield, right? The next big, EA would do this, right? Where you'd have mainline Battlefield and then you would have kind of like a smaller project that was a subset multiplayer project. But normally those smaller projects were like bug-free. So I guess they felt the pressure to compete with Activision and maybe take advantage. And that was where they fell down. So for me, I think it's really sad because it can really affect that team. That team has tight targets, has a certain amount of money they're expected to make. So for me, I'm just sad and hoping that they address it in live and fix it. And they've already, I guess, basically admitted to it and come out and said they're going to deal with it. So hopefully that turns it around for them and the game keeps running.
Anyone want to add anything?
So I think that, because I've been in that position many times, it's the divergent agendas within the organization that result in that 90% of the time. The only organization, and this is back in the day, not today, that kind of got around that, because I remember they had a saying, was Blizzard, before they became Activision Blizzard. They were like, it ships when it's ready. But very few people do that. And EA, just like Activision was, just like is, at the end of the day, especially when you're a sequel, when you're a first timer, yeah, let's get it right, let's bake it. There's always going to be somebody in a position of decision making who's going to say, guys, if it's at least 70% bug free, ship it. I need the numbers. I need to please Wall Street. So it's business. And so unfortunately, it shouldn't happen with a title that size, but it does. So you've got to get, how do you prevent that? I don't really know, except that you get somebody powerful enough within the organization who's got a creative say to say, guys, this is our baby. Don't touch this. Do your numbers on the other games. And Blizzard, for a long time, got away with it.
Interesting. Anyone else?
I can add something. So I think one of the things is after Cyberpunk, and I've seen this in mobile development now, developers feel more comfortable pushing back to execs now, saying that the feature or the game's not ready to be shipped. And I've seen it in some of the organizations that I've worked now, where we as developers have also understood that it's okay to talk to players and tell them that we'll take a couple more months, but like ship a better product to you. And that kind of a conversation has started happening more freely after like the last 2 years and what's happened with multiple titles. So I think that's a good takeaway out of the current situation, at least for mobile.
Can I just add something as well? I think it's also, it's a bit of, it is sad. It's sad for a number of reasons, because this is the advantage we have with Liveops, is that the game doesn't have to be ready on day one. So why not say, I'll reduce the scope and I'll release content in, in a cadence that goes after that. So you can actually build yourself into a position where you think it has to be all singing, all dancing on day one. But as long as you've got good core gameplay and you've got some really key features to the game, you can make really big announcements and really, get extra engagement with players if you plan when to release some of those things.
Make sure there's not too many bugs instead.
I actually got a great example where it worked in the other direction. So at Warner, we had the Arkham Batman, and that after Arkham 1, huge. I mean, it did well, but the pressure was enormous. And then somebody said, hey, we got this Lord of the Rings platform or IP. I want to do Shadows of Mordor. And it got greenlit, but it was so under the radar. It came out super game, super polished. Nobody was saying that's going to make my quarter. And those are the best kind of games, right? And now, of course, the next one, more pressure.
Any other questions?
It's on. Okay, great. I'm actually curious because the question about Battlefield 2042 is interesting because right now the Steam numbers are showing that Battlefield 5, the previous title, is showing the combined stats of every other Battlefield title. So I'm a little curious because it resonates a lot with the Liveops story too. Do you ever think that the frequent cadence of games being released right now could be maybe, revisited with older games essentially being reinvigorated by having a Liveops team come right back to the older titles and just breathe new life into them? What do you guys think of that?
So I totally agree. And you can look at some of the sort of like games that come out, like Among Us is a good example, which has been around for a long time and existed with just fairly, not minimal features, that sounds wrong, but, a good solid core gameplay. And now adding in maps and cosmetics and things has sort of invigorated the game. So yeah, I definitely think there's value there. Players love the games and there is a value of nostalgia as well. So I think, yeah, totally.
Yeah, I would say, I think it's not about whether it would work. I think it would work. I think the question is, it's like the iPhone, for instance. Can we just upgrade and keep iPhone 11s and keep them going? Or do I want to sell iPhone 12s, right? And if you're a retail publisher and you're spending conservatively 50 to 100 million on a game, which is what they do, then the first 90 days at $60 USD is important. And it's still where 50 to 60% of their revenue comes from, right? So I think specifically with the case of Battlefield, you did see a big bump, not just from Steam, Game Pass, because EA tied everything into Game Pass, right? So a lot of their older titles are up there. But is that going to make more money than putting 100 million in Battlefield 6 and selling that for $70 on PS5 and Xbox Series X? Probably not, right?
And then again, having a year of fixing bugs on the new title.
Exactly, yeah.
I think what's interesting is if you look more on the indie side, because they don't have the money to spend $20 million on the next game, they've got these old games that are still alive and they've got the community. The problem is they don't have the same constraints and the same objectives and, what Wall Street has. So to your point, everybody, the publishers, they want to sell the new iPhone, right? But then there's another thing you've got to worry about is when is it the right time? Even if it's not about, I got to make my numbers, I got to please Wall Street, when is that shifting just right? When have you reached a peak sort of when that, okay, this game was great, I still got my 400,000 users, but is it time to upgrade it and I could do something better? So I think it's all about, we're in a new age now where most games are going to have longevity. So get to know your community, see where it goes, manage it. It's PR to the nth degree, and then you figure out Wall Street.
I think there's also another thing which comes down to, have you got the infrastructure in place to do it? It's not easy to shoehorn Liveops infrastructure into a game that already exists. So there's a balance of, is it worth the investment or not as well?
Any other questions? Oh, okay.
Thanks. My question is, we're talking about games that are releasing on a yearly basis. I on the flip side of that, when do you think a Liveops game should come to an end? Say, for example, World of Warcraft is, 15 years old now? And it's still using the same engine and all the technology from back then. When do you think it's time to sunset and then release a new game? And what are your thoughts on that?
Go for it.
I've worked on games that have been going for 15 odd years, so I could probably argue maybe never. No, player numbers and definitely engagement and looking what's happening and, you know, revenue. You need to be able to keep the money coming out in to keep the doors open effectively. Yeah, I think so. I mean, my funny story is I worked on Lord of the Rings online. How long does it take to get to Mount Doom? So apparently forever. So we never got there, certainly in the time we had it. But yeah, I think that's probably my answer.
I mean, I guess the honest answer is when it doesn't make enough money to be supported, right? Which is the truth. Blizzard, since they did WoW Classic, I mean, you're talking about probably $1 billion plus a year, right? So if you have, even if the game's 50 years old, if it makes $1 billion a year, I'm sure that you keep it running, right? Keep it running until it runs out of cash. I work, you know, on RuneScape at Jagex. It's a 20-year-old game. You guys, probably the numbers are public. At Company House does 120 million a year, right? So will they shut that game down? Definitely not. They'll probably consider making new ones, but you have to be careful about where the market is today, cannibalization, all this kind of stuff, right?
You also run the risk of losing your audience as well. So if
that's a huge risk.
Yeah.
It's like as much fear about the money as I don't want them going to a competitor. So if I'm going to do a launch of RuneScape 2.0, am I going to keep at least most of them?
Do you want to add anything, Arjun?
Yeah, so this is from context of Farmville 1, like the OG Farmville. We had to sunset it eventually, but it was a very difficult call because even though like the player numbers kept reducing, the core set of players, and some of them had been there from the day one launch, it's very difficult to disappoint those players because that's basically the audience that's going to stay like for whatever Farmville franchise that you release. These players were playing Farmville 1, they were playing Farmville 2, and we were in a similar conversation where it had eventually become costly to keep the game running, but it was also a call of, do we want to disappoint the set of players? Because if we disappoint them, they're going to stop playing any other Zynga game from this point onwards. So what we ended up doing was, there is an aspect of automation that you can attach so that some amount of events, regular cadence can keep running on its own with like minimal maintenance. But we had to eventually sunset it as well. But yeah.
Okay, well, we're going to have to wrap up there. So thank you very much, all four of you. I learned quite a lot. I think the best thing I take away is that planning and priorities and decision-making are key, which is great because I basically go on at Oscar about that every day, and I feel validated now. So, well, thank you so much for all the panelists, and thank you to everyone for listening. I'm sure if you've got any other questions, you can try and grab one of us at the end. Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.